So another well-known name performed at the Combine this week. The media has been talking about him, and he's been a hot topic in this draft. But Bronny James performed in the scrimmages, and it was nice to see him get to play a little bit of a different role. Earlier during the measuring portion of the Combine, he measured at 6'1", which was a little bit shocking. I know before that he was listed at 6'4", but before we even get into the scrimmage stuff, what are your guys' thoughts on him coming in as shorter than projected, on any of the effects that might have on where he could go and what his role will be in the NBA?
Yeah, that kind of hurts because, like, before when it was like, oh, he's 6'3", 6'4", like, even though his, like, skill set might not be all the way fleshed out and, like, might not be there mentally, like, you could see, like, there's always room to grow the bigger you are. Like, you could turn into maybe like a Drew Holiday or something like that. But now that he came in at like 6'1.5", like, you're looking more of like he said in the combine, like he's looking more at like a Davion Mitchell, like guys like that. Like, that puts you in like a Jose Alvarado, like those type of guys, like in that size range, which just kind of drastically, even though you wouldn't think it would because it's only a few inches, it just kind of drastically impacts your overall, like, the ceiling that you have. Like, unless you're going to turn into like a Jalen Brunson, who I even think is still maybe a little bit bigger than Bronny, is like, it's going to be rough at 6'1" to like make a huge impact anywhere. So I think it kind of slots him in as a role player probably in the NBA.
Yeah, I feel like one of the good things about hearing stuff like that about him is he doesn't seem to be delusional about what he can be or what he already is. Like, I would have been annoyed if after these kind of tough measurables came out and he was like talking crazy about how he was going to be the best guard in this class, or that he was like, don't worry about the measurables, like I'm still like that guy. Like, he seems like he knows what he will be good at and what he will have to work on. He's not, like I said, he's not delusional about his strengths and weaknesses, which I feel like shows a lot of maturity for someone who's only like 19, 20 years old. So I feel like if he can just have that like maturity level and get into a system that actually develops players, I don't see why he couldn't stay in the NBA for a pretty long while.
I think for me too, it was a little bit of a disappointment because I knew he was before this, I knew that he was kind of around the 6'3", 6'4" range, or that's where they had him listed. And I was kind of hoping that he would come in taller, 6'5", because then obviously 6'5" is a big difference between 6'1". But once he stepped out on that court, you kind of realized how short he was. Obviously, we saw the measurements before, but compared to the other prospects, I think it kind of stood out to me. And even there was a guy who was at the draft, and he was talking about how Bronny looked tiny in person. So after that came out, it definitely became more apparent to me how much smaller he is. But what are you about to say, Cameron?
Yeah, because like at USC, he didn't look that small. Like, he just didn't. But then like all of a sudden they say 6'1", and then it was apparent. It looked like on TV it was 6'1". Like, it just, I don't know if it's like a mental thing with just hearing the number and seeing him, but like he visibly looked smaller than what I at least had seen him look.
And it might not have helped that he was also out there with like the other guards on his team were A.J. Johnson, who I know is a taller guard. He also had Baylor Shireman, who's, I want to say he's around 6'8", something like that. I think
Antonio Reeves was even on that team.
Yeah.
He's like 6'6".
So I don't think that really helped his case because there's other taller guys out there. But with that being said, it also makes you realize that he's gonna have to play more of the lead guard, which I feel like we didn't really see him play a whole lot at USC. But you saw him kind of do that in the combine, initiating offense, not just standing on the wings. And I'm going to be honest, it wasn't the best thing out there, but I don't think it was also necessarily the worst thing ever, if that makes sense. I think a lot of it was he was just kind of sped up. He threw some turnovers, but I think he showed an ability getting downhill more than he's shown ever before. More specifically, getting into like the in-between game, he showed more of his floater. But I feel like that was one of my criticisms that I kind of had with him offensively, is that he wasn't really trying to necessarily get downhill more. But obviously he had ball screens to kind of help him maneuver his way and find his area.
Yeah, to me, one thing that I really liked was his aggressiveness. Like, it just seemed like he was actively kind of hunting his shot at times, which you almost never seen at USC. Like, it just throughout his career, kind of knock on him has been his like lack of aggressiveness or like want to out there, and it looked like he kicked it into like a little bit of another gear in the combine. It wasn't always successful at times. Like, he missed a couple shots. He didn't shoot it the most efficient. Like, even from three, I think he went 2 for 9 overall, but in one of the games at least. But he really like he impressed me just with how good he was as an off-ball guard. Like, even at his size, like a lot of people just are kind of pigeonholing him to, well, he's 6'1", he has to be a point guard now. But I think if you look around the NBA, like, especially if you can put him on a team like a Denver or like just teams with other bigger guards or bigger creators like a Dallas or like even the Lakers with LeBron at times running the one, like there's room for players his size. So like while his size definitely hurt him, I don't think it was necessarily like a deal breaker. Like, there's guys in the league at his size that have been able to carve out significant roles for themselves. So it's just whether or not he can be consistent in his shooting and like getting better as an on-ball guard, because ideally it's someone that how you want him to be able to be on-ball guard, but it's not like a do or die skill that he needs.
I think it is a good. You mentioned that, but I think of a guy like Mike Conley on the Minnesota Timberwolves. Like, obviously, he has the skill to be a lead guard, and I think Bronny will still want to develop that skill. But I think Bronny is also the type of guy where you're just going to want him out there for spacing, and I think him having that ability, obviously he's done it at USC, but I think it'll translate at the next level too, because if there's another number one option like Anthony Edwards, he can be kind of like a Mike Conley who stays in the corner, you know, cuts off ball to make the defense work a little harder, not just let them get stagnant, you know?
Yeah, one of his biggest assets is floor spacing. You would like him to see him shoot it better than he did at USC. I think he only shot like 27% from three at USC. But I think that is a little hard because you take 5 months off after the hard thing, and then getting back into playing in the middle of the season, shooting, you haven't been able to be that active shooting and stuff like that in a long time. So I think if he can shoot it like he's appeared to shoot it at times, like in high school and the EYBL, like if he can shoot it like how it looks like he can, there's definitely room for him in the league. It's one of the other things that I noticed when he was out there playing is that while he didn't look like he's necessarily an offense initiator with the ball in his hands, it looked like he can kind of create his own shot a little better than what I remember. Like, I seen couple different step backs. Like, one, he up-faked the guy and he threw out and caught it around the free throw line, something similar. I've seen like Jamal Murray and stuff do like similar moves. So that was a little bit impressive. And like overall, it was a really good outing for him at the combine. Something else is his arms measure at like a 6'7". That's kind of an unusual like measurement, like 6'7" to 6'1" height. That's like a +6. Like that's kind of on the leader scale of things. Do we think that he's done growing?
That's the question. Like, he's only, what is he, like 20 years old, 19 years old? So if he grows another inch or two and he is truly like 6'3" without shoes, all of a sudden he becomes a 6'5" guard with a 6'7" wingspan, and he's like actually built. He's not like a skinny guard. So he could very well be a pretty solid, at least defensive type of player. But at the same time, he's kind of been around this height for a few years now. So I don't know if maybe he will have like a late growth spurt, because LeBron didn't really have a growth spurt when he came into the NBA. He was already 6'8". He grew in weight, but
he actually, okay, so this isn't confirmed, but players that played against him have like alluded to that he grew like 2 inches after
you think
rookie
so?
year. Because like, especially if you look at pictures of him, like next to like, NBA bigs like AD and Dwight Howard, he doesn't look like he's a full 2 to 3 inches smaller than those guys. Like he looks like he might only be like an inch or two smaller.
I know too. When he first came in, obviously it's only an inch, but when he first came in, he was listed as 6'8". But I think in more recent years, like since they've done the
Remeasuring of
yeah,
players.
he's been listed as 6'9" for the most part. So it is possible that he could. No, when LeBron came in, he was a senior in high
That's
school.
cool, which
So-
is only a year difference, but
But yeah, I also look at Bronny and he just looks like he's already pretty filled out. He could still grow, but I just feel like there's not going to be much more movement, which obviously you would like to see him have.
yeah, I'm not expecting him to like 6'5".
Yeah.
But I think it's still like we see it like sometimes with guys like I know Adu Thiero is a person who played at Kentucky. Like he grew inches past the age of 20, so like it's not completely unheard of. And I think if he can just get like an inch or two more, it just drastically changes where his ceiling is.
And I was going to say, and I will say, I just did a little bit of research, aka Google, so don't completely quote me on this, but from what I was already kind of aware of as well, it's just like it's around the age of like 18 to 20 where you can have like extremely rare like moments of growth, but it's highly unlikely, so I'm not sure
it's like
how
I'm just
realistic
saying-
that actually is. Like
I'm just saying how many
at
people
5'8", I've looked at it a couple times. Like, you know,
I'm just saying, I know personally, I think I've grown like an inch and a half since I was 20, but I don't know, just that our wingspan to height ratio just looks weird. Like I know there's players in the NBA with that like drastic of a difference, but we've now seen his combine performance. Do you guys still think it was a good idea or a mistake for him to come out of college?
I mean, I don't think it necessarily is hurting him for coming out. And Shams posted a report that said he's probably going to stay. And he had a solid outing the second day of the scrimmage, so I think that probably helped him. The main thing is that I noticed, and I kind of thought this before, but he just looked like a very different player compared to what he did at USC, if that makes sense. Like, and I'm not even talking about necessarily how he played drastically better, but just the style. Like he was coming off more ball screens. I feel like you never saw him do that at USC. So it comes down to the fact that college and the NBA are a little bit of different games, and I think he's going to be required to do different things at the NBA. And long term, I think that's his goal. Go to the NBA, and obviously he has enough interest. So I don't think it necessarily hurt him. Honestly, I'm at the point now where I think it'd be good for him to stay.
Yeah, I feel like specifically in this draft class as well, the second round is so wide open for teams if they want to go to overseas talent, if they want to go to veteran players, or take a guy like Bronny James who has some potential upside somewhat with him, but also with the chance of potentially adding LeBron James in the future for a year or two maybe. So I feel like just because of that, it kind of makes it beneficial for him to stay in this class, but also just for him as a player, next year is going to be really tough, especially at that guard position in the class. So I don't know if him coming back for another season to re-enter the draft next year would have really moved the needle much in terms of where he could potentially get drafted.
Yeah, I definitely think it was probably the right move to go now. I just think if you go back, like you said, the class next year is better. So you have to be not just better than what you are this year. You have to be better than the new guys coming in and the guys that are your age that also stayed and improved. So that's kind of tough. And then on top of that, like, I think for him personally, like, ideally you would have wanted to have a better freshman year. But it might have all kind of worked out for the best for him, because if you look at it, the advantage of going in the first round versus the second is like the guaranteed money. But like, we know he doesn't necessarily need that
money.
So would you rather go, like, let's say everything works out for the best in the best case scenario and he's like a lottery pick next year, but being a lottery pick, that means you don't get to really control where you go. You're going to probably a bad team, and that, like, more expectations are on you in that sense. This way, coming out now, everyone kind of knows the deal. Like, he's not expected to come in and be the face of a franchise or change a franchise. And he kind of gets to control where he goes. Like, there's been, like, if you go in the second round, there's been plenty of guys like Austin Reeves for the Lakers who kind of like told teams like, don't draft me. I'd rather go undrafted, or I kind of want to go to this spot in the second round. So there's more flexibility and more control you have as a second round pick. And speaking of money, even though we just say he doesn't need it, second round picks get off their deals faster. So if he does somehow like burst through and like shows he's like a really, really good player, he'll get to his second contract faster. So I just think in all those perspectives, it's the right move. And then as far as the development front, I think his game is only going to show so much in college. Like, the college game, I think his game is just more suited for an NBA-style game, like with a bigger court, a farther three-point line, so the game is spaced out more. I just think while he can drive the ball, just especially at his size, the college game just isn't necessarily suited for what he does best, being someone who needs to be off the ball to really be where they're most effective. To where in the NBA, we see guys like him have like success. Like, there's guys like Peyton Pritchard and stuff like that that can make out some role for themselves. So I just think leaving now is probably the best move on the business and the development front. And like, at the end of the day, if the goal is to be a good NBA player, there's no place better to work towards that than the NBA itself.